We're in our next to last week in our series through the book of Matthew. Today we'll be honing in, as Matthew hones in, on the burial and resurrection of Jesus. And keep in mind that, as we've seen with Matthew, he tends to focus more on the characters, the people, the cast of characters surrounding the crucifixion, the burial, the resurrection. He remains consistent here. He doesn't get into a lot of the details, if you will, of what goes on there, but focuses definitely more on the characters. And so that's what we're going to do as we study these characters today, see what's going on with them, see some of the things we can mine from their experience, from their reaction, from their responses to the burial and resurrection. So Matthew chapter 27, verse 55, going through verse 15 of chapter 28. Scripture says, "Many women were there looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee while ministering to him. Among them was Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out in the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb, and went away. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the grave. Now on the next day, the day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate, and said, 'Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, After 3 days I am to rise again. Therefore give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal him away, and say to the people, He is risen from the dead. And the last deception will be worse than the first.' Pilate said to them, 'You have a guard. Go, make it as secure as you know how.' And they went and made the grave secure, and along with the guard they set a seal on the stone. Now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled away the stone, and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. The guards shook for fear of him, and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, 'Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who has been crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, just as he said. Come, see the place where he was lying. Go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and behold, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you.' And they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to report it to his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and greeted them. And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, 'Do not be afraid. Go and take word to my brethren to leave for Galilee, and there they will see me.' Now while they were on their way, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests all that had happened. And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, and said, 'You are to say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this should come to the governor's ears, we will win him over and keep you out of trouble.' And they took the money and did as they had been instructed, and this story was widely spread among the Jews, and is to this day." Let's pray. Father, we're grateful for Matthew's telling here of the facts as he reports them of the burial and resurrection of Jesus. We're grateful, Father, to have this opportunity to take a look into the people surrounding this, see what was going on there. We pray, Father, that as we learn from them, that we are able to see how it is that this matters to us, to see how it is that we can grow from this, to see how it is that we can be used of you to impact this world for your glory, for your kingdom, even as we study this topic today. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So the first group of people we're going to see is a group of unexpected heroes. We're going to see first this group of unexpected heroes today. Now, you may remember that by this time we're to the point now that Jesus has been crucified. He's been taken off the cross at this point. And you'll remember that the disciples, what's referred to as the main group of disciples, the 12, the 11 by this point, because Judas was done. But they had scattered. They had scattered. Peter and John and James and all the fellas, when things started getting tight, things started getting fearful, they ran. They went. They got out of town. Maybe some of them didn't go all the way out of town. They were hiding. Okay? You get what I'm saying? They were hiding. Now, of course, John tells us that he had come back. John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, he tells us that too, right? John, in his gospel, tells us that he had made it back because Jesus on the cross tells him to take care of his mother there. So apparently John had made it back. But the big idea is that the disciples that you might expect to be the heroes here, you might expect, big talking Peter to have been back on the scene by now, and maybe he's gathered the other fellas to be back on the scene. They're coming for some personal redemption here, right? Be back to make their stand and say, hey, we are his disciples. We are with him. We're gonna take care of his body. We're not gonna let this be anymore. Because it was a common practice, in fact, that when a criminal was crucified, that his body would stay on the cross for days, even weeks. They let the birds and the animals eat away at their bodies. It wasn't necessarily commonplace that the criminal's body would be taken out and put into a tomb. So, you would think that knowing this, that perhaps they'd come back and want to take care of Jesus' body here. But no, they're nowhere to be found. But there are some people that are there, aren't there? There are some people, and perhaps they are unexpected heroes. And it tells us that many of the women disciples, these women who had been following Christ, Mary and the other Mary, they were there. They were there. It says from a distance, but I think that the big idea and the message here is that they didn't scatter. They didn't scatter. And it's important to understand this because, especially in the context of their culture, they were not, respected. They were not expected even to stand strong, if you will. Probably by many weren't even expected to have the capability to stand strong. But here they were. Here they were. Peter, nowhere to be found. James, the other disciples, nowhere to be found. But here were these women standing in the gap. Standing in the gap. They're supporting Jesus. They're ready to take care of his body. They're ready to do whatever it took to see that Jesus was honored here. And friends, that's a common refrain, isn't it? So often we see women standing in the gap. We see women, followers of Christ, standing in the gap when men fall short. When men fall short of biblical manhood, we see women, followers of Christ, standing in the gap. When men fall short of leading their families spiritually, we see mothers and grandmothers standing in the gap. We see this, we see this, understand what I'm saying when I say it. We see this too often. Okay? I mean, it's best that women do stand in the gap when it needs to be. We praise God for that. But far too often there are too many men who aren't there. Far too often there are men who are falling short, biblical men falling short of the biblical mandate that's there for us, and forcing biblical women then to stand in the gap here. Praise God that you do, and keep doing it. And we've got to pray for women that are standing in the gap. And we've got to support women that are standing in the gap, giving them as much support and resources that we can, while at the same time praying for their husbands. Praying for their husbands to stand up, to step up, and be the biblical men that God has mandated that they be. But we see, I think, a fine example of that here. just in this short mention that these women were there. They were there. But they weren't the only unexpected heroes. You also see that there's this guy named Joseph from Arimathea. He comes, and he kind of comes out of nowhere, doesn't he? I mean, we haven't heard of this guy. He comes out of nowhere, and he goes to Pilate and says, I want the body of Jesus. I want his body. I'm going to give it a proper burial. I'm going to put it in my tomb. This is noteworthy for several reasons. Matthew doesn't tell us this. Matthew tells us that Joseph is a disciple. Joseph of Arimathea is a disciple of Christ. But he doesn't tell us another important nugget of information. The other Gospels fill us in on this and let us know that Joseph of Arimathea was a member of the Sanhedrin. He was a member of the council that did the trial of Jesus, that found him guilty. Now, presumably, Joseph of Arimathea spoke up against it, voted against it, if you will. But he was a member of the chief priests, the elders, if you will, the Sanhedrin. This was him. He was in there. He and John tells us that Nicodemus was with him. Here's another detail. So Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, both members of the Sanhedrin, go to Pilate here. They are putting themselves out here, guys. You get what's going on here. They are putting themselves out there. They are letting it be known. They're now no longer secret followers of Christ. They're no longer secret disciples of Jesus. They're putting it out there publicly. In a very tense time still, as we've read, and as we'll continue to look at, a very tense time for them. They're putting it out there, a very dangerous time. Because we see that the chief priests and elders, they aren't above killing somebody, are they? They will kill you if you are going against them. And so for Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, but in particular we focus on Joseph of Arimathea to do this. This is quite remarkable. Quite remarkable that he does this. It's quite remarkable, but at the same time, it's expected, isn't it? It's remarkable, but it's expected that followers of Jesus Christ will follow Jesus Christ. It's expected that followers of Christ, that disciples of Christ, will follow him wherever he leads, whenever he leads, wherever he calls. It's expected that we will be unexpected heroes, if you will. That's the expectation. And I know, we're not comfortable thinking of ourselves as being heroes, and that's not what I'm telling us to do. Go out and be a hero. But to be the unexpected time when you do something that you're not thinking God has necessarily prepared you for, or God, your hand goes up when they ask for volunteers to cook for VBS Tabernacle. Where did that come from? I'm not a chef, but I'll cook. Right? This is an unexpected hero type of situation. When you hear something going on, when people are talking about this, when God calls you and you hadn't been thinking about it, and you just say yes. So yeah, this is what God has called me to do, and I'm saying yes. No matter the circumstances, no matter how fearful it might be, no matter how tough it might be, God has called. I perceive and sense and believe that call, and I say yes. And I say yes. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about being an unexpected hero. Not that it's unexpected to God, but maybe it's unexpected to you. And it's unexpected to me. And not necessarily that we're looking to be called a hero, but that we're just looking to do what God has called us to do. Looking to be obedient. And the question, more than anything really, is when will I allow myself to do this? When will you allow yourself to be this unexpected hero? Because I think that's the road. I think God has always given us opportunities. God is ready to give us opportunities to be used this way. Always ready for that. The question is, are we? And the question is, when will we allow ourselves then to be used like these women disciples and like Joseph of Arimathea was used, as we've read today? Next thing we'll see as we look at these characters is we're going to see the usual suspects. We're going to take a look here at the usual suspects. They show up here down in verse 62. On the next day, the day after preparation, the chief priest and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate. So here we are, still with the chief priest and the Pharisees. We've been talking about these dudes a long time, haven't we? They have been dogging Jesus from the get-go. We have seen these usual suspects over and over and over again. Jesus is now dead, and they are still hounding him. Still hounding him, getting after him. And notice, what does it say? It says, now on the next day. Do you get what's going on here? The next day would be, what day for them? The Sabbath. Should they be meeting with Pilate on the Sabbath? If they're following the law strictly, which they're supposed to be doing, right? They shouldn't be. They're conducting business. All right? So, I mean, this is, you can tell that these guys they're running scared here, guys. They're running scared here. So on their Sabbath, we see the usual suspects then meeting with Pilate, and they refer to him, they say, sir. And so, they use some of their same methods. They go in here and they flatter Pilate. They're trying to flatter him, referring to him as sir, when they really have no respect for him at all. And they come in here and, oh, sir, Sir Pilate. But let's talk for a moment. So they get in there and they say, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days, I am to rise again. And we'll talk about that deceiver in just a moment. But first, I want to talk again about a theme that we've talked about several times, about how so many of these people have been so close to redemption. Here they are. What do they remember? They remember that he said 3 days. On that third day, he's going to rise. They remembered that. And I believe that they believed it could happen. They remembered that they acknowledged the miracles that he had performed. They acknowledged the supernatural power they had. They didn't want to acknowledge that it came from God, but they acknowledged there was something about this guy. And here, when they say, hey, we remember that he said this, and while the other words they said, they try to play it off as they don't think it's really going to happen, what's really going on in their hearts and minds is they believe it's going to happen. They believe it's going to happen. And that's why it's so close to redemption. Rather than submit to that, rather than surrender to that, rather than see, oh my gosh, this is the power of God, this Jesus is God, they're fearful of it. They're fearful of this power that they expect to be on display. They're fearful because of what it will do to them. They're still their pride and their selfishness is getting in the way of their redemption. Is that a familiar story or what? How many times, maybe you've wrestled with it. Maybe you wrestled with it for many years. Your pride and your selfishness got in the way of your redemption. How many times can I tell you as a pastor, I've talked to someone who says, I just need to fix myself first. Your pride and your selfishness is getting in the way of your redemption. Don't fix it yourself. Let him. Let him. And these guys, I believe, while not really in their hearts or that close, but in their language, they're that close to redemption. And so they're trying to protect their position. And what do they get into? He said in verse 64, therefore give orders for the grave to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people he has risen from the dead. And so they get into this idea, they're trying to promote this idea that the disciples are going to come and steal him away. Now, guys, I would be very surprised if the chief priests, the Pharisees, the elders, if they didn't know exactly where the disciples were at this point. I would be very surprised if they didn't have their spies, their security, whatever team it was, that they had people following these guys. They had people out there. They knew where they were, and they knew these disciples were running scared. They weren't concerned at all about these disciples doing this. I really believe that. I believe they're concerned was that Jesus' power was going to be revealed. That was their real fear and their real concern. And they're just pulling at straws here, trying to figure out some way that they could stop this. And so, hey, if part of it is throwing out some propaganda, then so be it. Pilate said to them, "You have a guard, go, make it as secure as you know how." And they went and made the grave secure. And along with the guard, they set a seal on the stone. And so they go and they have a guard. Presumably, most of the time, a Roman guard had 4 soldiers in it. So this is probably what they had here. Maybe it might have been a few more. But chances are they got these 4 guards. And they went and they rolled the stone over the tomb. And they sealed it. So it was like some wax, most likely a wax type substance that they sealed so that you could tell that it wasn't broken. So they went all the way to show that the grave was secure, the grave was guarded. Now, I want to go back for a moment and talk about the usual suspects and one of the things they said. Remember that we read that they said, "We remember that this deceiver said this." They referred to Jesus as a deceiver. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that ironic? And isn't it ironic that they're using a ploy that's as old as the garden? Old as the Garden of Eden. Because you'll recall perhaps that Satan, the serpent, comes into the garden and he uses deception with Adam and Eve. Eve in particular, as he's talking to her. Of course, remember Adam was standing there watching this whole thing. But he uses deception. And the reality of his play even then was that he is really trying to imply that God is a deceiver. That's what he's doing with Eve. That's what Satan was doing with Eve in the garden when he says, "Has God really said?" And so in some way what he's doing there, in the same way that the chief priests, the elders and Pharisees are doing here, is implying from way back in the garden to here that God is a deceiver. That God is deceiving people. That you can't depend on the Scriptures. You can't trust the Scriptures. They might not say in so many words, Satan might not have said in so many words that God is deceptive, the Scriptures are deceptive, but that's the idea. That's a big part of the implication there. And that's a big part of the implication that we face today. A big part of the war that we fight in our world today is that you can't trust this stuff. This stuff is deceptive. The Word of God, the Scripture. You can't even trust that it's the Word of God. You can't trust because, hey, it's not the original manuscript. You can't trust it. You know, no one questions any other old books, whether or not it's the original manuscript or not. They still read it as if whoever wrote it. But you know, I mean, that's one of the ploys that's been used, and it's used by these guys, and it's used today. This stuff is deceptive. You can't trust it. So be prepared for that. Be prepared that people are going to come to you and say, you know, hey man, you've really bought some stuff here. You can't trust it. You can't believe it. Be prepared for that to come at you. And understand that that's a ploy that's been used from day one. And so if we can understand that this has been used, then we can be better prepared to fight it off. When you know something is coming, you can be better prepared to fight it off. So understand, these usual suspects, they also use the same old stuff, the same old tricks, the same old ploys. Next thing we'll see, we've titled He's Not Here. We'll see a couple of characters in play here. Look at verses 1 through 10 of chapter 28. Now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. So here it's still the women. Still the women. Here we are on Sunday morning now. Okay? Jesus was crucified on a Friday. And at sundown, Friday to sundown, Saturday, that was the Sabbath. Now the next morning, the third day, is Sunday morning. And we have women again, going to the tomb. And presumably, Jesus' spices and whatnot, so the smell, the odor won't be horrible. So that they're going in to prepare the body. It was also a common practice that among the Jews, that when a person when a person died, that after 3 days they would go and they'd make sure that the person was dead, because sometimes maybe a person, they didn't have medical science perhaps like we did. A person might have been in a coma, a person might have been unconscious, and they would go and make sure that the person was dead. So that was part of the practice too. Now, everyone knew, Jesus had taken a spear, he'd taken that beating. They were pretty sure Jesus was dead. Okay? So that's where they are on that Sunday morning. And behold, verse 2, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. The guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. Now keep in mind, this all happened before the women got there. This didn't happen when they got there. They didn't witness the earthquake and the angel sending the stone rolling away. This happened before they got there. Matthew is kind of backfilling the story here for us, letting us know that this had happened before they got there. So some pretty incredible stuff had happened here. Now, keep in mind that we didn't necessarily need this earthquake to happen and roll away the stone for Jesus to get out. Okay, that wasn't the case. But this was really just a sign of the supernatural happenings that are going on here. Some people think that perhaps the earthquake, when the earthquake happened, that was the time of the resurrection. I don't know that for sure. Nobody can know that for sure. But certainly it was a sign that something supernatural, something at the hand of God was going on here. Verse 5, the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who has been crucified. He is not here, for he is risen just as he said. Come see the place where he was lying." So, the angel works to reassure the women here, reassure them and have them not be afraid, reassure them that Jesus is alive just like he said he would be. He gives them, he wants to show them some evidence. Hey, this is where he's lying. He's not here anymore. And it's also important to note that Matthew gives us that there are all kinds of small details that just further the evidence that this really happened, in telling us that this was Joseph's new tomb. We know that lots of people would bury their family members and everything in one tomb, but this was a new tomb, recently hewn out. So no one else was buried in this. Jesus was the first person. There weren't any other bones in there. There weren't any other bodies in there to cause confusion or anything like that. And so he was able to give the evidence that it was Jesus who had been lying there and he is no longer there. Go quickly, verse 7, and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and behold, he is going ahead of you into Galilee, just like he told them he would. Told them they were going to be in Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. And they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to report it to his disciples. This strikes me. They ran to report it to the disciples with fear and great joy. And man, I gotta tell you, that's a picture of the Christian walk. As I think about personally my walk with the Lord, fear and great joy. To this day, that's a picture of the walk. That's a picture as a pastor. I mean, I have great joy. I have great joy in serving as a pastor. I have great joy in seeing the momentum that even as we speak, and in the last couple of months, I had great joy in seeing the momentum that God has created here at New Bethel. And still at the same time, there's fear. I see people saved. I see people joining the church. I see people being a part of discipleship groups. I see people growing in their faith. And at the same time, in the back of my mind, when is someone will say something? When someone will do something. When someone gonna, just be a person and do one of these things and try to, break up the momentum. There's this great joy, but there's this fear. That's part of what's going on here, right? There's also, sometimes God has called me to this. God has called you to that. And you have great joy about this thing, whatever, this ministry, whatever it is that God has called you to. But then there's that fear. Can I do it? Is he really calling me? Am I the one that he really wants to do this? That's the picture of Christianity, y'all. I think that's just what it's going to be. We're probably always going to have this fear and great joy. But notice what they did. Lots of times, fear can do what to us? It can paralyze us. But it didn't paralyze these ladies. It said they had fear and great joy, and they ran. They ran. They ran to tell the disciples what they had seen. They ran to tell the disciples, fellas, get up out of your hiding place, get up off your tail, and get to Galilee. He's going to be there just like he said. You see, that's the important thing for us. We're going to have fear, we're going to have great joy, but don't be paralyzed by it. We got to run. We've got to run. And I think that's important for us to be able to remind each other of. I think that's why one of the most important things of being a part of a church, being a part of a church family, being a part of this bride of Christ is that we can account for each other. We can say, hey, I feel like you might not be running right now. Let's run. Let's run. I feel, hey, is your fear paralyzing you right now? Let's get up and run. Let's get up and run. Let's run. Because that's the example that we've seen here from the beginning, these unexpected heroes. And behold, Jesus met them. And man, if you run, guess who will meet you? If you run, guess who's waiting to meet you and greet you and remind you that I'm right here with you. You're not by yourself. And they came up, took hold of his feet, and worshiped him. It's always an opportune time to worship him. It's always time to worship him. Then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and take word to my brethren to leave for Galilee. And there they will see. He's not here. We'll finish up with the usual suspects, still scheming. Still scheming. So the word gets back. Verse 11, while they were on their way, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests all that had happened. And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, you are to say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. So again, driven by their fear, driven their desire for power, driven by their desire to stay right where they were, and not give anything up, the usual suspects do what they do best. They resort to more scheming. And they say to these guards, hey guys, this is going to be the story. First of all, we're going to give you a lot of money. All right? Let's give you some hush money here so that you'll tell the truth about what happened. And what we want you to say is that, again, these scared disciples, these disciples came while you were all asleep and stole the body. So, a couple things that they're trying to get people to believe in and buy into here. Okay? First of all, remember, we've learned about these Roman soldiers. I mean, this is a professional army. These are highly trained Roman soldiers that we're talking about. And it's probably pretty hard to believe that all four of them would be asleep. Okay? So that's unlikely. It's unlikely that all four of them would be asleep at the same time. It's unlikely and hard for us to believe, and it should have been hard for anyone to believe, that the disciples, as scared and scattered as they were, would have come back and tried to overwhelm these disciples here. It's hard to believe, the guards, it's hard to believe that even if that had happened, even if the guards were asleep, how are these disciples going to come in and move this big old stone and get this body out and they never wake up. The guards never woke up. I mean, this is just a story that's hard to believe. But as you see, they paid them for it, and they apparently told the story because it was a story that was circulating around. It was getting around Israel. It was getting around town. People were telling that story, and it continued to be told, and it continued to be told, and it continued to be told. And that wasn't the only one. I mean, we've seen plenty of different stories told. People trying to explain away the resurrection with other ideas. People trying to say that, hey, Jesus didn't really die, he just passed out. He fainted. The swoon theory is what they call it. You know, he took those 39 lashes, if not more. Insides coming out probably of his body as he hung there. He's nailed to a cross. He stuck a spear through his side. And he passed out. That's what people want you to do. He just fainted. He passed out here. And when he got put into the cool of the tomb, he woke up. He woke up. And then they got him out of there somehow. That's one of the things that people want you to believe. People want you to believe that, hey, maybe it wasn't the disciple. Maybe it was another group of people that came and robbed the grave. People would have you to believe that the accounts of the resurrection were just hallucinations. That, all these people were just, his followers were just hallucinating when they say when they saw him. All kinds of schemes and ideas are put out there to try to discount the true supernatural fact of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And friends, that's what we face. Just as we face the idea of the scriptures being deception, people likewise still try to discount the reality of the power of Jesus. They discount the reality of the transforming power of Jesus Christ in your life and what it could be in their own life. We see that the power of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. How can you believe that? How can you believe that? For us, it's the power of salvation. It's the power of life. But for those who are perishing, it's foolishness. And we have seen that, and we'll continue to see that played out over and over and over again. Even in the face of the overwhelming evidence. The overwhelming evidence that Jesus died and was resurrected. There's overwhelming evidence that people can look at. People can look at it unbiased, and say that yes, the evidence supports that this is fact. It's fact. Now, what I want to leave us with today is this. The fact is that we live in a world that is scheming. We live in a world where Satan is still at work, very much at work, scheming to disprove the truth of Scripture. Scheming to dissuade us from, and dissuade people from the idea that the Word of God is the standard of truth for us. Scheming to water it down. Scheming to have us not believe in the supernatural things that we read about and that we do believe. The world is scheming. The world is trying to move people further and further away from the truth of the Scripture. And I believe that one of the key things that we have to think about is how do we respond then to this scheming? How do we respond to the schemes of the enemy? How do we respond to the schemes of man? As they try to put more and more out there saying that we shouldn't believe this. We shouldn't live by this. And yes, in large part, I'm speaking in response to to the things that we've seen going on in our country. You know, we see the Supreme Court ruling on homosexual marriage. We see racial tensions. We see people getting fired up over Confederate flags, rainbow flags. We see all this. And the question for us as Christians is, how do we respond? How do we respond? Because, guys, I got to tell you, I think most of what we're seeing here, and I'm generalizing, but this is part of the schemes of the enemy, is to put these things out there. So the question for us is, how do we respond? It's important for us then to recognize, and I prayed about this a little bit earlier, it's important for us to recognize that we as Christians are not called primarily to achieve change in people's heart through the United States government. We're not. We're called to achieve change in people's hearts through the Word of God. That's what changes people. That's what changes a country. Yes, and you know what? When we first think about it, that seems like it might take a little bit longer than just trying to vote on a law. Okay? And it's true, it does. It takes a little longer, but it lasts a little longer too. It lasts a lot longer. You see, when that true change that's affected in a person's heart through the Word of God, that's eternal. That's a lasting change that takes place. And listen, I'm not telling us that you shouldn't pay attention to government. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't vote. I'm not telling you that we shouldn't voice a Christian and biblical perspective in these things. But I'm telling you that our hope is in the Word of God. Our hope is in God's Word, not in the United States Constitution, not in the Declaration of Independence. All these things were written by flawed people. Christians or not. This was written by a holy, perfect, righteous God. We can depend on this. And we can trust that this is what we should be using to change people's hearts, to change the heart and attitude of a country. So, hey, when someone asks you, what do you think about homosexuality? Because plenty of people are going to ask you that, aren't they? They know you're a Christian. Sam, they know you're a Christian on that bus in Chapel Hill. They're asking you, aren't they? Anyone at work, they know you're a Christian. Guess what? Over the last couple of weeks, you've been getting asked a lot of questions, haven't you? They want to know where you stand. And they really want to draw you into something. They want to draw you into debate and argument about these things. And they want to ask you about homosexuality. Is it a sin? And they just want you to say, yeah, it is, and those people are going to burn in hell. That's what they want you to say. But I want to encourage you to approach it differently. Is homosexuality a sin? Yes, it is. God frowns upon it, just as he frowns upon heterosexual sex outside of marriage. Just as he frowns upon any sexual sin. Just as the scriptures declare and desire for us to be sexually pure in any form. Let's not isolate and hone in on one aspect of sin. Let's talk about sin. And let's talk about the cure for sin. Let's talk about the one who paid the price for sin. And people are going to ask. People have asked me, what do you do if a homosexual couple comes to New Bethel? Oh man, I pray that they do. I'm putting it out there. Put it out there. I'm saying it out loud. I pray that a homosexual couple does come here. Because you know what we'll do? We will love them. We will love them so that we get the permission then and get the open door to show them the truth. To show them the truth. A homosexual couple comes in here, we're going to treat them just like any other couple caught in sin comes in here. We're going to treat them just like you were treated. Sinner, when you came and when you come. We treat them just like I hope you treat me, a sinner, when I come in. We're gonna try to love the sin out of each other. So that the truth can set us free. Let's pray. Father, we're grateful to be able to study your word. Grateful, God. I'm grateful that I can be surrounded by a group of people who, in as much as I know, believe like I believe, that your word is your word. That it is our standard for absolute truth. That it guides our thinking, guides our living, guides our voting, guides our conversation. Father, help us to be better and better and better at that. As we become better and better at being disciples of Jesus Christ. Better students of the word, so that our conversation, our living, our voting can be driven by a true biblical worldview. And Father, as we do that, I pray that we can relate and live out some of these people that we've studied today. Be the unexpected hero. Father, I pray that we allow ourselves to be used by you in ways that we haven't imagined. And just because we haven't planned it out, to trust, God, that you've planned it out and to allow you to use us. That we won't fall into our usual patterns and ways of denying you, walking away from you, being used in ways that's less than you gifted us. But that we can be people of your word, being used of you to grow your kingdom, bring glory and honor to you in this world that really doesn't want to. Help us to stand strong. To stand strong in the face of the enemy. To love when it's hard to love, so that we can bring the truth that changes and sets people free. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Guys, we'll have an opportunity.